What's in your pre-workout meal? Pre-workout meals. And why are they potentially the most important meals of your day? Protein, carbs, fats. How do these macronutrients affect your digestion and performance? Now, for most sources, proteins and fats typically take upwards of 2 to 3 hours to fully digest. On the other hand, carbs can digest typically quicker, depending on what source you're getting them from, whether they be simple or complex. Typically take around an hour, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less to fully digest, and seem to be the most optimal source of macronutrient to use for energy and pre-workout. But not all carbs are created equally. Like I mentioned before, there's two different sources of carbohydrates that you can intake: simple and complex. Simple are going to be a lot quicker digesting and typically induce an insulin spike, causing somewhat of that crash that you hear about. They aren't something you want to cut out of your diet completely though. And complex carbs are a little bit more slower to digest, typically sustained energy, and also you may find other minerals and or micronutrients within those carbohydrates. Some examples that you'll find of simple carbohydrates are like honey, white rice, table sugar, and most candies and junk foods that you'll find out there. Some typical sources of complex carbohydrates that you'll usually find are things like whole grain breads, brown rice, pastas, and oats or oatmeal. Typically, these are a little bit more fibrous, a little bit more heavy on the gut as a feeling, and then also are slower to digest. Now, don't dodge complex carbohydrates just because they feel a little bit heavier on your gut or they're a little bit slower to digest, because most of the time you're going to find out that they carry a lot more micronutrients and or trace minerals that you won't find in simple carbohydrates. So at the end of the day, both sources should find their way into your diet for overall bodily functions and performance. So in my opinion, the most optimal pre-workout meal that you could probably consume is going to be a source of complex carbohydrates and a source of simple carbohydrates. When combining these two sources of carbohydrates together, you're going to have a nice long and sustained source of energy and a nice immediate source of energy to get you fired up for your workout and holding you through the entire workout and hopefully into the rest of your day. Here's a few pre-workout meals that I use that have typically both sources of complex carbohydrates and simple carbohydrates to fuel my workouts. Things like bagel and jelly, oats and honey, oats and fruit, or fruit in general, sweet potato, brown sugar, white rice with a little brown. There's a few others that I'm sure that I could pop off the top of my head, but just ensure that carbs are not the enemy. Use them to your advantage. They're your body's most efficient source of energy. Drop down in the comments below what you use or eat for pre-workout meals, and we'll see you next week.